Today, we're going to be talking about one of the biggest debates in the competitive Splatoon scene, and that is Splatoon 3's Reefslider versus Splatoon 2's Splashdown. Which one's better? While most people collectively agree that Reefslider is an improvement over Splashdown, there are a few things about Splashdown that people seem to forget when this topic arises. I'm going to go over those today, and I'm also going to go over the things that Reefslider does better than Splashdown. At the very end, we'll go over which of the two specials I think is truly the best. Before we start, if you enjoy this video and want to see more content like this, consider subscribing. On the channel, we do a lot of things related to Splatoon, such as competitive gameplay, tutorials, and analysis videos like this. Alright, enough chit chat. Let's get into it. So, it's no secret that Reefslider is the successor to Splashdown. Splashdown was considered to be the worst special in Splatoon 2 due to its poor design, but the developers still wanted its style to live on. As a result, Reefslider was born, which is basically just a horizontal Splashdown. Fun fact, a data miner went into the game's files and found this beta image for Reefslider, which literally looks like a sideways Splashdown. It's definitely obvious that this was meant to be Splashdown's sequel. Before we start comparing them, it's important to establish the pros and cons of Splashdown. Here are the pros. Splashdown had a pretty decent lethal radius. It would deal 180 damage to any opponents who were somewhat close to the explosion, killing them instantly. But Splashdown also had really good splash damage, inflicting 70 and 55 damage to opponents who were a bit farther away, respectively. This was great for combos, the most notable one being with Torpedo on the clear Dapple Dualies. You would use Splashdown, inflict 70 damage with a partial hit, and then immediately roll a Torpedo at the enemy's feet, inflicting another 35 to 60 damage. Its upwards hitbox was buffed late into the game's life, so anyone who was above the explosion would also be splatted. Splashdown wasn't just good for killing, as it served as a sort of counter for other subs and specials. First of all, the blast would destroy any nearby bombs. This was especially helpful for negating an opponent's bomb rush special. This is kind of irrelevant now though, because all bomb rushes were removed in Splatoon 3. The blast would destroy a number of other specials in play, if they were nearby. Specials such as Baller, Bubble Blower, and Booyah Bomb would all be destroyed instantly, as well as a few others. One of Splashdown's best features was that it had the ability to be used during a super jump. You could jump to a teammate, activate it midair, and then just land with the explosion, preventing your jump from being camped and killing anyone who tried to. Unfortunately, this technique was a bit predictable among comp players. People could tell when you had Splashdown at the top of the screen, and if someone saw a jump-in marker, they could just check to see if your Splashdown was ready. If it was, they'd simply move out of the way, wait for your Splashdown jump to finish, then proceed to shoot at you. Despite this, it was still a great alternative way to use the special, and if used smartly, it could still catch some competitive players off guard. Splashdown also had no end lag. You could pretty much move instantly as soon as the blast animation completed, and as a nice touch, you also had a few invincibility frames. The last pro that I'll cover here is the ability to use Splashdown from a high terrain and drop on the people below you. This was a great way of using it, as it was very difficult for opponents to react and move away in time. Perhaps the best spot to use this was on the reef. I remember getting tons of doubles and triples with this method. Alright, I think that about does it for the pros. But now let's talk about the negatives, and why this was considered to be the worst special in Splatoon 2. The first one is definitely the lesser of two evils, but it is noticeable. Splashdown just didn't paint very much. I mean, yeah, this looks like a decent amount, but when comparing it to other painting specials like Booyah Bomb and Bomb Rushes, it really wasn't that much for a special, and I think that really hurt its utility. It did paint enough to help with some clutch zone caps, but I think it would have been considered a lot more useful if its paint radius was bigger. Well, I'm sure most of you watching this already know what's coming, but we gotta talk about it. The main reason that Splashdown was known as Splatoon 2's worst special was because it was nearly impossible to pull off successfully. When activated, your character would fly up into the air, and then splash back down. But the issue was that you would be airborne for a decent amount of frames, and you weren't invincible during them. So any player with decent aim could just shoot up and kill you, before you even had a chance to land. As a result, Splashdown was viewed as a joke by the entire competitive community. A few weapons that had it still saw some use, such as Dark Tetras and the Kenta Sloshing Machine, but that was only because the main and sub-weapons were good enough to still function, even with a trash special. Splashdown was odd because it was designed in a way where it couldn't really be fixed. Either they make it so it's hard to shoot out of the sky, which would let people just use it as a panic button and get rewarded for it, or make it so it's super easy to shoot out of the sky. The devs went with the second option because ultimately that was healthier for the game. There was just no in between, and that was due to the special's poor design. But now let's fast forward to the present day, where we have Reefslider. What I'd like to do first is directly compare Reefslider to Splashdown, going over the same pros and cons I just brought up, so we can see what Reefslider does better and what Reefslider does worse. Then, I'll go into the unique traits that Reefslider has, that sets it apart from Splashdown. After that, we can determine which special is more useful overall. First up, let's talk Lethal Radius. So this is pretty painful to say, but as of right now, Reefslider's Lethal Radius is significantly worse than Splashdown's. I swear, you can detonate right next to someone and they just don't die. Not to mention, its splash damage is also worse. It can only deal 60 damage to a nearby opponent, which results in it losing a lot of combo potential. Just because I mentioned it earlier, the torpedo combo is one of them. Partial damage from Reefslider's blast does 60 damage, and partial damage from a rolled torpedo does 35, which adds up to only 95 damage. This really hurts to say, and I hope they buff Reefslider's damage in this next patch. So let's address this now. Remember how I said that Splashdown destroyed all bombs that were near it? Well, this kinda sucks to say, but Reefslider just straight up doesn't do that. You could detonate right by a splat bomb, and then you'll just die to it immediately after. I really don't know why they decided to take this feature away, because it was one of Splashdown's best attributes. The good news though is that Reefslider does still counter a decent amount of specials in Splatoon 3. It can just ram through big bubblers and crab tanks, destroying them instantly. So Reefslider does still serve as a sort of special that counters other specials. Well, this is another unfortunate point. Reefslider can't be used when super jumping like Splashdown could. I mean, it makes sense. It would be kinda weird to mount a shark mid-air, but still, it was just a nice alternative option for this type of special. Okay, this is the worst one for me, and I know other players share this pain. Reefslider has an astronomical amount of end lag. After detonating, you're stuck in place for what feels like an eternity. What makes it worse is that you have no iframes. As soon as that animation is complete, you're vulnerable. If you ask me, this is what hurts Reefslider the most right now, and I really hope this gets buffed in a future patch. The last Splashdown pro to compare was the ability to use it from high areas. And good news, Reefslider can still do this, albeit with a bit more calculation. It was pretty brainless with Splashdown. You would literally just jump off a ledge and go straight down on those below you. With Reefslider, you need to aim it properly and make sure that you detonate at the correct time. But it's still pretty easy to do. Its small lethal radius can make this a bit tricky though. So from that little side-by-side comparison, we can tell that Reefslider definitely lost a lot of perks that Splashdown had. But what was the compensation? Reefslider has to be able to do some new things that Splashdown couldn't, right? Well, let's compare the cons next. The first negative point I brought up about Splashdown was its poor paint output. Sadly, Reefslider isn't much better. I think it paints a little more, but I'd argue that this is roughly the same. So, not much improvement there. Now, what does have some improvement is its ability to not be cancelled. However, it's not for the reason you might be thinking. It still has a bit of startup lag, and you're vulnerable during those frames, just like Splashdown. In fact, you're even easier to shoot at during these frames because you don't go up into the air. But what makes Reefslider better is that you don't have to activate it right in front of people. Due to its design, you can use it far away from opponents and then charge into them. But do note that if you're just using this thing as a panic button in close quarters fights, you can expect to die as much as you would have with Splashdown. Alrighty, so on paper, it would seem that Splashdown actually did a lot more than Reefslider, but it was just ruined by poor execution design. While this could be true, there's still one more thing we need to talk about, and that of course are the unique traits of Reefslider, things that Splashdown could have never dreamed of doing. The first thing, and this is a pretty obvious one, is that Reefslider can run people over before it detonates. If someone happens to be in your trail and you run into them, they're dead. Another really underrated feature of Reefslider is that it doesn't necessarily need to be used aggressively. It's a very flexible special. It can be used as an escape option if you're in a dire situation. It can be used as a free jump point in Clam Blitz to get some cheesy power clam scores. It can be used as a displacement tool to help your team push in, and it can also just serve as a distraction. What makes Reefslider good is the amount of different uses it has. A lot of people think that it can only be used to rush head-on into opponents, but the truth is, that's actually one of its lesser strengths. Creativity is key with using this special successfully. Phew, that was a lot of information. But the good news is, I think we have enough to go off of now to make a decision. Which special is better, Splatoon 3's Reefslider or Splatoon 2's Splashdown? A lot of comp players are very quick to jump on the "it's not Splashdown, so Reefslider is better" train. But I think we need to keep an open mind here. Splashdown could do a lot of useful things, like eating bombs and specials, being able to be used on a jump-in, and much more. But it was just so hard to pull off successfully with how easy it was to deny. Its design was also really poor, basically rendering the special unfixable. Reefslider, on the other hand, is designed in a much better way. While the special itself is weak, and it couldn't do a lot of things that Splashdown could, it does thrive in a variety of other methods. The special has a lot of utility, and being creative with it can lead to some really clutch moments. Splashdown didn't have this utility. You were very limited with its options. It was very hard to use, and even if you could, it was tough to use it in an effective way against smart players. Reefslider may be weak and have a ton of issues, but ultimately, I think it is the better special between the two. But only slightly. Reefslider should absolutely be able to eat bombs, and I think its end lag is pretty harsh. I believe that buffing both of these aspects would be completely fair, and I have hope that Reefslider will be buffed. Unlike Splashdown, it's designed in such a way where it can get some small buffs without becoming an overpowered panic button. We're very early in Splatoon 3's life, so I honestly have a lot of hope for Reefslider. Let's just hope that Nintendo actually acts on that and doesn't leave Reefslider untouched for 3 years. So, what did you guys think? Do you agree with my take that Reefslider is better than Splashdown? Do you think that Splashdown's positives overpower Reefslider's positives? Let me know down below because I'm really curious what you guys think about this debate. And if you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing, as writing this script and getting all the footage took a lot of work. With that being said, that's going to be it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.